Raja and I both hail from Peoria, and we are friends. I, as some of you know, got elected in a special election in 2015. Raja came in the next year in 2016. Raja can talk about it, but we both grew up in Peoria, and that's where our family settled at. Some of you know this. My father's Lebanese, and my great-grandparents immigrated about 100 years ago through Ellis Island and wound up in Peoria. And I now today represent 8,000 Lebanese families in Peoria, Illinois, that all have come from the same town that my great-grandparents came from, called I-2 Lebanon, which is a small village in northern Lebanon. And so really proud of the Lebanese heritage that I've had and what I represent in Peoria. And I think about my great-grandparents who came over and didn't speak any English, didn't have any money, but had an American dream and prospered in this country, and how I've been a beneficiary of that. But that happened growing up in Peoria. Raja's parents are in Peoria, and I joke when Raja got elected, I know his mom and dad very well, and so whenever they had a problem, they would call me and not Raja, right? So any constituent problem, they'd come in. I said, "You know, your son got elected now, right?" But it didn't necessarily matter. Also, Bradley University is where my mom and dad graduated from. My wife graduated from. Raja's dad was a professor there for over 40 years in Peoria. And Raja will be too humble to tell you this, but he was valedictorian of his class at Richwoods High School in Peoria, Illinois, and did very, very well there and went on to great things. I'm just glad he didn't come back to Peoria to run for Congress and decided to run in Schaumburg, Illinois. But we've enjoyed a great working relationship. And over the last 5 years, I think we've done 5 different bipartisan events together. Raja came to Peoria. We did a town hall meeting there. We went to Raja's district and did an event at Allstate there that was a public event. We went to John Marshall Law School, did an event there. We've been on the radio multiple times. And so we enjoy each other's company in being together. We ride on the plane almost every week back and forth with each other, back and forth. And I tell him I'm in his district twice a week because I'm in at O'Hare Airport twice a week. So, we have that friendship. I recently got appointed to the Intelligence Committee in April, and to be there now with Raja has been a great experience. To see the men and women around the world that protect us every day is really fascinating, and so it's an honor and a privilege to be part of the Intelligence Committee and to work there and to work with Raja. And what's refreshing and unique about the Intelligence Committee is, when you go in there, you have to put your phones and all your electronics outside, so no one is distracted in there. No one's playing to the cameras. And so you have a real dialogue and discussion, maybe what it was like 20 or 30 years ago in the Congress. But it's been a great way to get to know members on the other side and work on a lot of these issues. And as you know, we have many challenges around the globe, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's terrorism, whether it's China, and many other geopolitical issues. But being part of the Intelligence Committee and now to serve with Raja has been great. And he brings a tremendous perspective from his background also to that. So I tell people I learn every day being on this committee, and it's we have a hearing later on this morning that we'll both be at also. So again, look forward to your questions and comments on anything that you may have. And I would just tell you this morning, I'm playing in the congressional basketball game next Tuesday, so we had practice today. So when I got done with practice, I had my Bears hat on, and Raja came in with his Cubs hat on. So we were Illinois through and through. So anyway, thank you, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning. It's an honor to be with you. It's an honor to be someplace they pronounce your name right. This is a true story, Darin. I think I may have mentioned this to you, but when I first ran for office in Chicago, I said, "Hi, my name is Raja Krishnamoorthi." And the person looking right back at me said, "Roger Christian Murphy. Very nice to meet you." And then he said, "I didn't know the Irish made it to India." And so anyway, it's really terrific. And that tells you a little bit about Chicago. It tells you a little bit about Irish Americans. I love them. In any case, thank you so much. And I want to say a special thank you to Libby, and thank you to Jim, and thank you to the Ripon and Franklin Center, Ripon Society and Franklin Center for having us. I want to say a special thank you to Darin. Darin has just been a tremendous partner on different initiatives, but he's a friend. And I really sincerely mean that. And, I think that one of the things that he mentioned is that he did do constituent services for my parents, which was very amusing over the years. And thank you, Steve, for being instrumental in that as well. But I think that it's fair to say that we have developed kind of a common approach in certain ways because of our common roots. His father was also our congressman. His father's boss, Bob Michael, was our congressman. And I honestly, growing up, I was surrounded by Republicans, but it didn't feel like people kind of attach labels to each other. Like, you are a Democrat, you are a Republican, we can't talk to each other, we can't work with each other. I think his family really represents that. Am I right about that? And that's what we need more of that on both sides, quite frankly. And so I just want to say thank you, Darin, for all that you represent in terms of your family and your values. We have done, now we counted it up, we've done it 7 times, Darin. Right? Yeah, we've done this 7 joint appearances. And we've done it home and away. And we've done it in different forum. And we haven't agreed all the time, but we have disagreed in a non-disagreeable manner. And that really matters. Let me tell you a little bit about what we've done legislatively. We've actually worked on different legislative issues, including workforce development, skills-based education, vocational education. That's a big passion of mine and Darin's. And we've actually passed a law modernizing our nation's skills-based education system, because it turns out only 1/3 of Americans have a 4-year college degree, but 2/3 do not. And we can't possibly get people access to the greatest social welfare program devised by human beings, a JOB, unless we get them a high-quality post-secondary education. And that can be skills-based education. And so we modernized that. Donald Trump signed it into law in 2018, and now 11 million people are getting a higher quality skills-based education. In addition, on a different note, speaking of the Ripon Society, which I understand was founded in Ripon, Wisconsin, and ended up producing our greatest president, in my opinion, Abraham Lincoln, we actually, Darin and I, named the office where Lincoln worked in the Capitol the Lincoln Room. And so that Lincoln Room now is used very, very frequently by a lot of our guests, and it's referred to as the Lincoln Room. And so we did a joint event there as well. And, quite frankly, I think that Washington could use a little more Lincoln these days. And I think that that helps to remind us of our common roots, but also our greatest ideals as embodied by Abraham Lincoln. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit about my background just so you know who I am and what informs me, and then I'd love to hear your questions. I was born in India. I came to this country when I was 3 months old, and my father was studying engineering at Buffalo, New York, at the University of Buffalo. And things were going really well until suddenly they did not in the recession of 1973. But thanks to the generosity and goodwill of the American people and its government, we were allowed to move into public housing and food stamps. So I spent about half of my early childhood in those 2 programs. But thanks to the generosity of the American people, we were allowed to stay until my father could complete his studies and then end up finding an excellent job in, of all places, Peoria, Illinois. I think they accepted the job before they knew where it was. And they basically unfurled the map, loaded up the U-Haul truck, started driving, and then they reached Peoria. And that's really where the golden period of our lives began, because that's where we bought our first proper home. Their 2 sons got educated in excellent public schools, and that's where they entered the middle class. And pretty much every night at the dinner table, my father would say something along the lines of the following. He would say, think of the greatness of this country. Think of the greatness of this country, and whatever the 2 of you do, my brother and me, just make sure this country is there for the next families who need it. And so that became the North Star of my personal compass Fast forward through college and law school, I ended up helping to start the anti-corruption unit of the Illinois Attorney General's office. Business was very good. It was full employment. And then I went back to the private sector. I ran a small business for about 7 years. We make infrared night vision military technology and for space applications. And then I got elected in 2016. And so now my life has come full circle, and I get to work on that mission statement, right, that my parents gave me, which is try to make sure this country is there for the next families who need it. And that's kind of what motivates my excellent staff. I have Brian, my chief, and Kevin with me, and they really embody the agenda of our office, which is try to get everyone on the up escalator of the economy, regardless of whether you're poor, middle class, growing a business, and make sure everyone has a chance, regardless of where you come from and regardless of the number of letters in your name. There are 29 in mine. And so that's kind of my agenda in a nutshell, and I think that's why we share a lot in common. So, and by the way, we used to have a lot of banquets at I2 Banquet Hall, which is the hometown for Darin's family and so many other Lebanese Americans, and that tells you a little bit about Peoria too. So anyway, would love to hear your comments, and thank you so much for having us.
Darin, thank you both very much.
My question is going to be about China. So there was a recent panel discussion on China where two main views were espoused. One, that China is a dangerous adversary and we must do everything we can to counter them. And the other, that China is a formidable competitor and we need to trade more with them in order to increase interaction and cooperation, which will reduce the threat. So my question for both of you is, where do you fall on that spectrum?
Well, thanks, Libby, for the question on China. There is no doubt that China is an existential threat in many different ways. National security, trade violations, cybersecurity. But to your point, how do you balance that with a middle class of 600 million and how we are so intertwined economically with China, right? Many in my own party would say we got to go to a Cold War mentality with China, right? But China is not what Russia was 40 years ago in terms of how we are tied economically. And so how do you balance that? Particularly in the tech space and emerging technologies, I mean, China is blatantly violating rules and norms and laws, right? They don't abide by the same rules and standards that every other industrialized country in the world has done. And so, what are the tools in our toolbox to get their attention and to change that? I mean, the last administration, they used a lot of tariffs to do that. We got into a trade war on that. So I guess if we want to go to a Cold War mentality, then we're going to have to go the next step and decouple. I don't necessarily think that's the right approach. And so the middle ground, I think, is partnering with our like-minded allies. We just saw this with the deal with the Australians on the submarine. I think that's a great move by the Biden administration to enter into this agreement for the nuclear subs for Australia. But there are many other ways. Again, our European allies that have the same issues with China, particularly on the technology space, the trade violations, we ought to be partnering with them. I was an early supporter of TPP, not perfect, but I was a supporter of it to isolate China. And again, do that from the standpoint of other democracies and other people that have our same value system to set up a rules-based system that brings China along. I don't think it's the right approach if we act more like China and instead of standing for the rules and the values that we stand for. I think also in the Indo-Pacific region, partnering with Japan, partnering with South Korea, partnering with Australia to do that is the better approach on that. But there is no doubt President Xi has a 500-year plan, and they want to overtake America. And they want to, there is no doubt technology and all these different spaces, they want to do that. You look at Hong Kong, they feel emboldened by what happened in Hong Kong, right? And the Taiwanese are very worried about that too. So, they are not going away, and they're going to continue to inch along and inch along and inch along. And so, you get in this debate about the authoritative regime that they have compared to democracy. And what President Xi tells people all around the world is democracy doesn't work anymore. You can't find consensus anymore. It's too hard to do that. You ought to go our approach, right? And I think that's a scary thought on how they do that. And you look at the surveillance state that they are under in China, and they try to market that to all these other dictators and authoritarian regimes around the world. And this is real in terms of what they're doing. And so I'm kind of rambling a little bit on that. But as we formulate policy on the Intel Committee and other committees of jurisdiction and on Ways and Means when it relates to trade, I think the better approach, again, is putting together a roadmap that partners with our allies and puts pressure on China in a way that they've never seen before.
So I'm going to echo a lot of Darin's sentiments here. I think that whether they're a you asked, I think, dangerous adversary versus maybe spirited competitor. I view them as a dangerous competitor, some hybrid of that. And I think that Darin's absolutely right. We can't decouple from them as a trading partner. I mean, heck, they buy most of Darin's district's soybeans and corn, a lot of it at least. I think under the Trump trade regime, I think they're buying more of it, hopefully. But the main point is, I don't think we can decouple from them. At the same time, they pose a real threat, and you know this. If you are aware of what they're doing in cybersecurity or stealing intellectual property left and right, and they, in some ways, I think they're even setting up a bounty system with regard to cyber threat actors who are incentivized to go after these trade secrets in our country and get something out of it monetarily for themselves. And then they're throwing elbows in the neighborhood, right? Taiwan, South China Sea. They're doing the same with regard to India in the Ladakh Pass. And so we have to, I think, engage them economically, keeping in mind what they're doing with regard to stealing our intellectual property and erecting safeguards to that here. But then we have to show strength with regard to their aggressive military posture. There's just no doubt about it. I don't think they respect anything but strength. And they think we're weak. You know, if you look at, I don't think I'm revealing any state secrets here, but I read a lot of this in our Intel communications, and I'm sure you see this in open source, but they think that we don't have the resolve to either project strength in the Pacific, work with our partners on common military challenges, or even buck up our own democracy and work on issues like infrastructure and make sure that internally we shore up our weaknesses. And so we have to play against type. We have to play against type. And that means with regard to the Indo-Pacific region, I think we have to help our quadrilateral partners, India, Australia, and Japan, in terms of maintaining a very robust security posture there. But we also have to exercise our soft power. That means, and I'm going to go off on an issue that I care deeply about, we have to lead the global vaccination program. You know, right now, we are going to higher levels of vaccination in this country, but much of the world is not vaccinated against COVID. China is going around peddling this crappy vaccine they call Sinovac and saying that it's going to be great for you, and it doesn't work, and they extract things in return. And we should be the ones going around the world using our effective mRNA vaccines. And so I've put forward legislation called NOVID. It's a play on words, no more COVID. And that would spearhead a program just like George W. Bush did with PEPFAR for HIV, AIDS in Africa. Probably the most successful public health program in the world. It saved tens of millions of people. And we've got to show that same resolve now. Exercise our soft power. It has tremendous geopolitical benefits for us. And at the same time, saves the world and us at the same time. So that's what I think we should do now.
So we all know that the U.S. has decided Huawei is a national security threat here and banned Huawei from here. But what we're seeing is that foreign companies with their headquarters outside of the U.S., regardless of what they do here, are sort of getting lumped in it and thought of in a negative way, that if your headquarters is not in the U.S., somehow you're less American in some way. And we just saw yesterday, in fact, Senator Wyden sent a letter to the FCC that says that foreign companies are a threat to U.S. national security, and asks the FCC to require U.S. telecom carriers, our customers, to register any foreign company, not Chinese, not adversarial, any foreign company with whom they're doing business. So it's really troubling when we're investing so much in the U.S. and other foreign companies are investing so much in the U.S. to be cast in this negative light. And I'm wondering, Darin, you mentioned the importance of allies, and we've talked about the importance of strategic codependencies to beat Huawei globally. Just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn, for the question. Just a couple comments. I mean, I thought when Biden went to Europe in June and worked with our allies over there when it comes to the technology space, and particularly on Huawei, we've seen some pushback there, and I think we got to continue to follow through on that. I wasn't aware of the Wyden initiative here, but I'll be happy to take a look at that letter and what you just described. But I'll just, as an example, I just, last week I took my first Intel trip, and I was in Djibouti, in the Horn of Africa. And the Chinese have a port there that they've built out over the last 5 years that will end up holding 10,000 Chinese troops. But they worked out an agreement with the Djiboutian government that for cameras through Huawei throughout the city. It's a city of 1 million. On every light pole, there are, throughout the city, there are 80 cameras that Huawei runs for the city, and China has a back door to it. So they watch, and they are surrounding our base there. But it's an example of what Huawei does, right? China goes in, sells Huawei as a way to monitor your population. It's a dictatorship there. But then they have a back door to it, right? And that model is followed, throughout Africa and other regions around the world. And so, again, that needs to be a wake-up call to what Huawei is up to on that. And so, in terms of how we formulate our policy on that, what laws we need to look at and how we strengthen that, whether it's through the FCC or whether it's through congressional action, I mean, this issue is not going away. And Huawei is persistent and they are aggressive, and they're going to try to work around these things. So I don't know that I necessarily have a good answer, but it's something on the Intel committee that we discuss and talk about often on what's the right approach.
I agree. I think that actually we should be cultivating 5G competitors to Huawei among our allies, not just in the United States, because quite frankly, we don't have enough 5G incumbents within the United States. And so if Ericsson or others among our allies are able to flourish, I think that's a good thing for us. And I think the other thing I was just going to say is I've actually introduced legislation on this called the 5G Development Act no, I didn't introduce it. I got signed into law. What am I saying? Brian's probably wincing at this point. I get laws signed every day. I just can't keep track. But this was
the club.
It got signed into law by Donald Trump, actually. So it basically sets up a prize and an incentive for innovation here. And again, that was introduced with Chris Stewart, actually, your colleague and friend and my colleague on the Intel committee. And we have to do more of that here. We have to incentivize innovation and reward innovation that happens within the United States. And in the meantime, work with our partners and allies and their companies. Because Huawei that's bad news. Huawei is bad news. I'm sure that's not a news flash for you.